Шановні гості, шановні глядачі, рада вітати вас сьогодні з нами в студії, організатори форуму.
Dear guests, I'm happy to greet you here in the studio. The organizers of the forum have raised many interesting topics. I'm happy that we continue these discussions. One more time, we shall speak today about the self-regulation. It is raised quite often these days. I'm glad to greet here in the studio and online our guests. We have Valentyn Koval, First Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Television and Radio Broadcasting, Tatiana Lebedeva, Commission on Journalistic Ethics, Svitlana Ostapa, Deputy Chief Editor of Detector Media Portal, Chair of Supervisory Board of PJSC, National Public Broadcasting Company of Ukraine, and Antonina Cherevko, Head of Independent Media Council, and Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine, Taras Shevchenko. I'm glad to greet you all. Let's begin. We speak a lot about it, but today, Taras, I shall start with you. You were at the opening speech and you mentioned that self-regulation, it's something that is for the journalists, but not so much progress in it. So from your experience, because you were the representative of NGO, now you work in the state sector. What is to happen for self-regulation to be working? What the state to punish for, and what can be left for the self-government authorities? Taras? Greetings. So it's nice to be in my office now. When I spoke about self-regulation in the beginning, it has many angles, and one of the most important ones, with a special emphasis on, is not only about existing certain body, commission or council that go through common questions and issue decisions. We have these elements. There's the Commission of the Journalistic Ethics and Independent Council. Both of them are in the panel today. The emphasis I wanted to make is that such bodies usually are part of the bigger structures or big membership organization that unites journalists or media employees. In some countries, media and PR can be united in one organization. And on the basis of this membership, the decision is made about ethics, where the worst decision can be exclusion from the organization. So, depriving of press cards, that's something that is issued by one or two powerful journalistic organizations. That is why self-regulation, to have the journalistic association, is not self-regulation. But as I said, it's both the membership organization and the selected body that goes through common questions and which is competent among the community of issuing decisions about ethics. And lawyers have a National Association of Advocates or National Bar Association, but they have a different specifics. They do not follow under the freedom of amalgamation, which is envisaged by the European Convention on Human Rights, because forced unification of lawyers doesn't violate the membership because they are special, but they can't do it with journalists. You can't say in the law the mandatory membership of the journalists. That is going to contradict the standards of the peaceful unifications, because only lawyers and doctors make that exception. And that's what Ukraine lacks. Of course, there are, some unifications of or unions of journalists, but there are media which are considered to be, according to studies, the ones who stick to standards the most, who are have the most powerful reputation, and some outlets refer to it, and Suspilny is one of them. So my question So in the framework of which unification the journalists of these media communicate, speak about ethics, is there such organization that unites journalists and whether they are members of it? And when the topic of the forum as the responsibility in the context of their responsibility to the community, so it has to be viewed in the framework of the journalistic union as a legal entity. Moving to the topic of what for the punishment can punish and the journalistic community itself, but it depends upon the problems. The state shouldn't make a punishment just to have it. It has to look at the problem. Maybe there's now problem with some accreditation of the journalists. There are big organizations would issue a lot of them to get some weapon maybe, or to advertise, like you will have more rights, you can enter any office and so on. This is a problem which could be solved on the level of self-regulation, but it's not. And then there's a question, maybe the state should solve this problem. So that's all from me, and I will be ready to discuss it more further on. So the competent unifications and press cards, we understand that free media the media do not fall under the influence of the state, but still there are questions that which ought to be regulated. So I started with the word punishment first because I wanted to get to the business. So Valentyn, you represent the regulator. And from your experience and from your work, from what is happening on the media market, do you see the possibility for the regulator to respond to some recommendations or solutions of some self-regulated organizations? Can it be the ground for introducing some punishments by the National Council, for example? The question is if there's in the law such a right or possibility for the regulator to make the documents that are in some self-regulated organizations. So far, the law doesn't know about self-regulated organizations. And of course, from time to time, we go to different organizations which are part of the civil society and we ask their opinion. But in any case, the ground for any of our decisions, and we speak about possible sanctions, is only the violation of law. No other reason can be used for sanctions imposition. Okay, thank you for starting with this. Svitlana, now I would like to hear from you, because here you represent the National Public Broadcasting Company. There's always a conflict between the representatives of the communicators from the state and representatives of different media and journalists. So do you think, and what is to be done for self-regulated organizations become mediators to solve certain maybe conflict situations between media and state bodies, business and so on, so that they can be influential and their solutions could be important for them? Greetings one more time. I shall start with the last conflict you mentioned. In this conflict, self-regulated organization, which is in Ukraine is the Commission of Journalist Ethics, can join the working group and develop some rules or recommendations in which way to communicate for press services and political forces with media. As for our mandate of the Commission of Journalistic Ethics, just like Tatiana Lebedeva, I'm the member of it as of 2013. we have different functions a bit. We consider complaints on violation of the Code of Ethics of Ukrainian Journalists. So we are going through the published materials, video, stories, or articles on the internet or in the printed newspapers, and we are to see if the journalist or this media outlet have violated articles of the Code of the Ethics of Ukrainian Journalists. So your first question, you asked Taras, what can the law or the authorities regulate? So I told you what we do. Commission also does some announcements if the violation is repeated, addressing all of the media community. And as for what can be done in the framework of legislation, it seems to me that one of the problems was already mentioned by Taras. It's about fake press cards, because it's not a single case when such activists, so to say, decided to make money on these press cards and those preferences given by it. They don't just issue them to those who are journalists, they sell it, announcing all of the benefits of the person who's going to have it. Since this has repeated for many times, and now the parliament is aware of it, in the Committee of the Freedom of Speech in the last meeting they said about creating working group and recommended to even include the criminal responsibility for the sale of the fake journalistic cards. So the process has been launched, because what we did, what the Commission did, we could, our colleague Oksana Romanyuk has written about it, and what we got in advance, those who were doing it, they just filed the lawsuit against those who wrote about the press cards being sold. According to the law, the press cards are to be issued by the organizations or editorial offices, journalistic organizations, and there are not so many of them in Ukraine now that can give those. It's the members of the International Federation of the Journalists, but not all journalists. We have 1,000 of journalists in Ukraine, but not all of them have trust to these organizations. That's why they are using only either the accreditation of the editorial offices, or if they are freelancers. So as a freelancers, they get it from some offices. So I think this question can be regulated by means of law. And media community knows that in the parliament there's registered, but wasn't considered the draft law on media. I think there has to be something about self-regulation, at least some brief remark, without describing what the self-regulated organization is to do. I think the journalists can deal with this themselves. Another thing, self-regulated organization differs from other similar structures of state bodies, because the code of ethics is something that the prosecutors have, the judges have. So we do not have such severe punishments like they do. And at the meetings with the prosecutors and judges, they ask, why do you have such soft punishments for the journalists? And when I tell them that other countries don't even have this, like such a thing as the public censure or condemnation, because the aim is to teach them to work in the way not to violate it. So they always are surprised, saying that it has to say in the law, if the journalist has violated the code of ethics, he's to be fired. And so in opinion of the leaders or officials, something like this has to be reflected in the law, and I tell them that it's incorrect. And if some solution or decision made against the journalist, then the commission is to think whether to give him a bonus, maybe to fire him. But unfortunately, in Ukraine, we don't have such an institute. You know, but I think it's another step of development as of not doing the handshake. Yes, thank you. Those who raised a question of press cards, I think something that is very urgent now. So, Tatiana, you have big experience as a member of many councils and many organizations, former, and now you represent here the Commission of the Journalist Ethics too. I'm confident that everyone is observing the activity of self-regulated organizations, and maybe your opinion. So Svitlana said that maybe something has to be envisaged in the law. What is it? What should it be done for self-regulated organizations to be more efficient?
Thank you so much. Welcome, dear participants, dear guests of our discussion. So any discussion usually is planned as a battle between two opponents. However, it seems to me that today we are not opponents. We are united by the same goal, by the same aim. Our key goal of the National Council of the Ministry for Information Policy and the goal of our organization is to protect our audience, is to protect our citizens from the inflow of manipulations, fake news, disinformation, low-quality journalism. It's quite an important issue recently. This is a question of mental health of our nation. We see the last case demonstration of anti-vaxxers, of those absolutely crazy messages, people who are under the influence of absolutely negative, not justified messages of low quality journalism. And this is the problem that we need to tackle altogether. I would like to remind you that during my speech at Lviv Media Forum, Taras Shevchenko referred as a paradox of getting back confidence. It's an interesting phenomena. This is exactly what we all do today. We try to restore confidence to high quality journalism, which was lost, unfortunately. And thanks because of some kind of digital challenges and due to some of our colleagues which understand their mission in a different way. So today we try our best to explain to people that they can trust us. So this is the key mission of the Commission for Journalism Ethics, not only to review complaints. I'm surprised that Taras doesn't notice a different attitude towards self-regulation authorities that we have now. I understand that it is a lengthy process, it requires patience, it requires understanding. The key driving force behind this process is education, is raising awareness. This is what differentiates the Commission for Journalist Ethics from the previous years, because we don't only review complaints, we also provide our recommendations, explanations. In every complaint, we provide our recommendations of what could have been done. We meet with regional journalists. We are very active in this area. A lot of journalists from regional media outlets take part. Of course, it's much more difficult in the region as in the capital of Ukraine. We organize online meetings with the stars of Ukrainian journalism, and we use concrete cases where they explain what are standards of journalism, what is ethics, and how difficult it is to maintain their reputation how it works for the journalist and for the audience. This is a very important process, and I think that, for example, my point of view is the following. We can talk about self-regulation in the legal framework of Ukraine, but not because to provide a larger mandate. We don't have a larger mandate. We are quite happy with what we have. However, we need that to convey our opinion that we need to have these ethics, that we need to have well-balanced information. But this is not the mandate of the National Council. This is not what we shall do. Those questions are raised by journalists and journalist union. So answering your question, I think that the society would should have this signal that there is regulation, there is self-regulation, and it must exist in a democratic country. I would like to highlight what Tatiana and Svitlana has said. They told us about the journalistic activities, about self-regulation in this profession. However, the National Council almost has nothing to do to the activities of journalists. We are entering this area when journalists start talking about issues which are aimed at destroying the statehood, nationhood, at spreading some kind of dangerous topics. However, we mostly are in contact, are in touch with TV and radio organizations. What Svitlana has said, she referred to the internet and other areas. So while in the Ukrainian media law, we don't have the mention of the internet. If a TV channel has an internet unit, an internet department, and something happened online, if it happens online in the internet, then we cannot even get involved, because internet is now not regulated at all. That is why this new media draft law that we referred to, it does have first attempts to regulate activities in the internet. Then it has a big article on co-regulation and self-regulation. This draft law, this last version of the draft law, it's now in its fourth version. So we will discuss that later. We will discuss the draft law on media later this day. As for the self-regulation, we cannot avoid the questions related to the legal framework. We have with us Antonina, Cherevko, media lawyer and expert on media development. Antonina, we are happy to see you today. I know that you work a lot at these topics, so you have heard our discussion. We are happy that you joined us. Speaking of the draft law or any other legal act, do we need to, what must it contain, and what are the criteria of self-regulation for a media organization so they have an impact? Thank you so much. I am happy to represent here the International Independent Council. This is one more initiative in Ukraine. I do agree with you. I do support the position of other participants of this discussion panel. I would like to say that there are a couple of points. First, we're talking about online activities, and of course it does change a lot. One of those changes which we have seen recently, this is the question whether it is possible to have this pure self-regulation online. For example, if we refer to those documents which are now developed by the Council of Europe in this area, then the position of the Council of Europe is the following. Where it comes to moderating of large content by large media platforms, then self-regulation in its pure form is not regarded as such which can efficiently work. So this is mostly about co-regulation. Now we are at the stage where there are no perfect answers to difficult questions, and we just need to have discussions like these and to define what we need to have now, what Ukraine needs to have now. Taras was right to say that state regulation is based on the problem that exists in the society. Of course, there are traditional spheres where the state has to act as a regulator according to the international law, for example, as hate speech. The state has international commitment to regulate in this area. The state also has to provide all opportunities for free development of the media to help develop pluralistic discussion in the society. That is why there is a number of areas where the state must work efficiently. As for the self-regulation and about the ways it can or cannot be prescribed in the law, I remember that this discussion has been very long. This is at least second discussion where we discussed similar topics in a similar company. So we discussed that with Tatiana. We also had a discussion about that. I think that some things can be stipulated in the law. I don't see why they cannot be there. I understand the value of this signal. I don't see any problem if these regulations are stipulated in the law. At least for us, a couple of things will be important. For example, to have safeguards which will prevent the self-regulating bodies from being prosecuted because of their activities. This is what was discussed when you discussed those fake press cards, when people try to prosecute these self-regulating initiatives for this issue which was raised back then. Then what my colleague from the National Council has said, that the National Council might have grounds for using these decisions of the self-regulating bodies. I think that we could have this position in, we could have it in the new draft law on media. So all of this is optional, because it makes sense to have these provisions in the draft law. However, if you don't have these provisions stipulated in the draft law, we will have our own will to do that. As for my personal opinion, I think that it's better to create an element of cooperation which would be more similar to self-regulation between the sector and the state. To me, it is related to those challenges which we face, which are related to the internet, to online ways. So I think it would be much more efficient in this area. This is a classic and very powerful idea which was discussed by Taras Shevchenko, which is related to some kind of unions of journalists. I'm just not sure that it will work in Ukraine in this historical period of time. It seems to me that those traditional professional links which have existed before, so-called workshops, industrial workshops which have existed before, they have existed since the medieval times. Though traditional links, they are partly destroyed by the internet. So we have interruption in this tradition. Now a person can be a journalist, tomorrow a communication manager or a PR manager. one person might have different career path. Because of that, I doubt that it might exist now in such a form, in such a classic historical form in which it has existed before. However, this is the question, this is a point for discussion. This is about finding compromises and finding best solutions between those who are participants of this panel discussion. So Media Council is open to any suggestions, to any ways of developing of the situation. For us, just as for Tatiana, the most important these are the interests of the society. Thank you so much. It's very important that we are all saying that the audience is the most important. So I don't know if Taras is still with us. We get back to the question related to legal acts, the legal framework, where all this shall be stipulated. So Taras, if you are still here with us, I would like to ask you a short question. Shall we have this self-regulation stipulated in the law? Shall there be a series of criteria or a separate article or a list of recommendations? What shall it be?
We know there are different models. For example, the model of Denmark, when it's regulated by the law, including with the regulatory commission and the members of the commission, which are which approve it in the order according to the law. So it's the extreme position when self-regulation is in the law completely. In other countries, they do not put anything into the law, but there are some organizations who united themselves and fulfill some certain function, and then the state doesn't interfere. But there's still the possibility where the state can maybe issue the criteria of which organizations can be referred to as self-regulated, and then maybe in theory there could be some register for these criteria, which can be very useful if the self-regulated body solution has legal force, or if some personal support can be given to self-regulated organization via Ukrainian Cultural Fund, for example. Then it's also important to understand which organizations have the status. There's a draft law on self-regulated organizations in general without link to media. It envisages the criteria of what a self-regulated organization is. So if we speak about the Ukrainian realities, before you answer, I would like to remind that we have a chance to ask a question. We still have several questions, but the audience can add them to on the Facebook or on YouTube. Taras, in Ukrainian realities, for Ukraine, should they be in the law or not? I think this is the last option I mentioned. It could be useful for Ukraine. Thank you so much. I know you need to go. I was very happy to hear you. See each other again, I hope. Thank you for participation. I would like to continue because in our National Council, we'll have to work on these new amendments to the law. And I would like to say that lately in the Ukrainian legislation, there is a habit to do maybe some general provisions or very specific ones. And in case if it's some very general provisions, they don't work. If they're specific, they seriously restrict the possibilities of the organizations. In this situation, we speak about self-regulation. So I suppose in the law, and that's what it is now in the law, you just have to put the possibility of existence of self-regulated organizations with the minimum parameter, the way they should look like, because otherwise we will just would over-regulate it or over-formalize it. And to give the state bodies the chance and the right to use the results of the activity of these self-regulated organizations. Then we will be able to use what these organizations have developed and will participate in the work. Now there are more details they're listed than necessary, but the law is still it's still in process, and many things will probably happen to it before it gets to Verkhovna Rada. But although we haven't met any deadline yet, and this law is becoming so perfect that doesn't even look like a win-win one, which is traditional for Europe and the States, but it looks something like not for you, not for us. Thank you, dear colleagues. So from your side, in what way, what organizations are ready for to be useful, help? And do you agree with the opinion that the self-regulation question of the organizations is to be in the law in some way? I'm grateful to Antonina because she said two most important things, not only for organizations or self-regulated organizations, but for the expert organizations, because those cases, criminal cases that were on the members of KZE, if they go to the court and somebody wins, they made it possible any expert decisions on the publication and assessment of the ethic nature of the content, which is very dangerous. As for what has to be in the law, I also agree with Valentyn. It seems to me that the structure of the organization, the principles, the self-regulated organizations do not need this, but to give a signal to the society and media community that there are such things which are regulated by the sphere itself, by the journalistic community itself. It would be just a step, in the direction to democratic principles of media existing in our country. It would have been support. And if it's a commission on journalistic ethics or an independent media council, it doesn't matter which organization it is, most importantly for media to feel responsibility, the media themselves, the journalists, the editors, that they to feel responsible for the content they produce. And for those problems that they cause for the audience if they don't think about ethical standards or professional standards. To make it clear that the professional media, it's a yes, freedom of speech, but also responsibility. That's what the self-regulated bodies ought to take care of. And we don't need more powers or some punitive possibilities. It's not about this. It's about rebirth of reputation that Taras mentioned. It's about reminding about responsibility. And I absolutely agree with Valentyn that the National Council of Ukraine can be guided by what is in the law because it's a state body. And very often there is a temptation to say where the National Council is looking at when something was misspoken on the radio or something was miswritten. But the National Council is limited on the one hand, but on the other hand, there should be someone who can say, indeed, this was a mistake, this is incorrect, you shouldn't have said this. If you care about the reputation, please correct this, and in no case repeat it. That's all. This is the educational mission, and if something like this will be mentioned in the law, it will be a powerful signal for the society. Thank you, Svitlana. Yes, I will answer in brief that you are to maybe list certain organizations which are to do self-regulation. No, not now, because we have a big lack of trust for each other, for the organizations. And such attempt was in the project that under the title of Counteracting Disinformation to list certain organizations, and we noticed the trend, people saying, who are these organizations, why are these organizations? So I think not yet listing specific organizations. And secondly, what Taras mentioned, he listed several outlets, and from which organizations are all these outlets? In fact, there isn't such organization with certain outlets. Maybe their representatives can be members of it. But I'm convinced that if there's a threat to profession, all of these outlets will unite, and they will go outside and defend themselves, defend their colleagues, journalistic activity, profession. It happened many times. I can give you an example of the movement. It will not be some specific organization, but such unification exists in the movement, like Stop Censorship, or now there's a media movement. And if there is a threat or some incidents that happened from schemy journalists, and as from the previous discussion, how they were interfered to work in the bank, you know, the journalists very fast, using social media, have organized a protest. So journalists are mobile, they can unify fast and they can protest. And as for listing specific organizations, I think no. Okay, thank you so much. We have many questions about press cards and about which organizations and what to say in the law, but let's go to the questions sent by our audience. I will ask a question. I don't know who's going to answer it. How to defend people from creating, you know, some aggression online? This is the question from Olga Vesnyanka. So Svitlana and I, we can answer. Among those principles which are in the Code of Ethics, this is our main document. Non-discrimination is one of the most important principles, and unfortunately it is often violated. We maintain statistics. Here I have a collection of what's been done by the Commission of the Journalistic Ethics for the past 2 years. And we have some general principles here and examples of our decisions. And among these, there are a few decisions made by us using this topic Olga Vesnyanka is mentioning. Discrimination per national sign is a breach of Ukrainian journalism. We know very well, especially regional journalists, they agree that it's not allowed to discriminate anyone, but when something happens in the city, they say, oh, this man of this nationality has committed a crime. They forget about the common principles. That's why every time when we face such examples, we write a well-grounded analysis of this situation, of this publication, and give very specific recommendations. And we have prepared videos using specific examples in plain language, explaining how to perceive such cases, how the journalist is to highlight this problematics. Thank you. Antonina, Cherevko, Taras, Shevchenko, please turn them on for a couple of minutes. There are comments from them. I wanted to respond and comment on what Svitlana has said, that example of unification when something has happened is not about self-regulation, it's about survival. It's about solidarity. But one case is when near the house there's illegal construction and go and break the fence, and another is to create the service of the owners of this condominium. Tonya. I also support Taras. It's what we all ought to move to the next stage. We are very successful when fighting against something, but we have certain difficulties in starting building something. And by the way, there's another question. What for? There's certain work done by the authorities for the sector itself, some, guidelines, professional orientation, but there's something they do for the society. And it would be great if journalists for society and social responsibility united more often than when they have to defend themselves or defend their interests. I wanted to also respond to the question of the hate speech because for the past 2 years I'm member of the expert committee on counteracting hate speech of the Council of Europe, and I represent Ukraine in this committee. This question is very important and very relevant. There isn't a single answer to it because for the past 2 years the committee was developing the new guideline in the sphere of counteracting the hate speech online, and this online aspect. On this aspect, there is a draft document. It hasn't been published yet, but it was voted in the beginning of this year. It's a general guideline to the states, member states of EU, on how to counteract hate speech in online sphere.
Значна частина рекомендацій, яка
There are recommendations which are related to the internet, to media outlets that work online, and we know that we all have a part of the responsibility. There are some parts which shall be regulated by the state. However, there is a number of things which shall be regulated by the civil society and the media, because as a rule, in a situation with hate speech, the state responds when the situation has already happened, when the harm has been done. There are other education campaigns which are also very important. We can join this process. Of education and raising awareness. Thank you. We have a comment from Svitlana and one question from the audience. Well, I don't mean that I'm against such union. I'm for this. But in Ukrainian realities, where 2/3 of the journalists work for the media which are financed by the oligarchs, which are not really interested in self-regulation, because we see by the answers, if there is a complaint to your a TV channel, to a program, there are only a few journalists, a few lawyers of this TV channel who respond to the Commission of Journalistic Ethics complaint. So others just ignore us, and it seems to me that it's difficult to speak of self-regulation or some kind of a union. As for the two organizations which are now working in Ukraine, there were no attempts to unite their forces because there is high level of there is a decrease in confidence. There is incitement of national hatred. It goes out of the scope of this self-regulation. We can punish those websites according to the provisions of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. We have a question from the audience. Thank you so much, Alexei Matsuka, co-organizer of the DMF. I've been listening to your discussion, and I would like to remind you that in our history we had cases of self-regulation of journalism. Stop Censorship movement, which was created until 2014. In 2012 or 2013, there were also cases of self-regulation. This is the studio of Hromadske, where journalists were united around the principles and around the logic of the journalist activities. So we do have problems with oligarch-owned TV channels. So my question is how we can influence those TV channels. As a member of the Commission of Journalistic Ethics, together with Svitlana and Tatiana, we are always discussing that issue. So it seems to me that it's important for the audience to understand that this discussion is happening right now. Can you please share your insights with the audience? how we can influence this not as a national council but as the self-regulation authority. Even in the current legislation of Ukraine, it is also related to so-called oligarch-owned TV channels. So there is guidelines of the editorial councils. However, these editorial councils are not well functioning. At the Svitlana TV channel, this council is efficient because it was elected, it wasn't appointed from the top down. They have editorial charter, they are reviewing complaints. So this is an example of how different broadcasters regard self-regulation. However, these examples are scarce. I'm really sorry we don't have any time left. I'm really grateful to our colleagues who were in the studio and who joined us online. Today we have discussed self-regulation, co-regulation and regulation as fast as we could. I hope that this topic will be raised further. The key functions of the self-regulation bodies is to protect the audience. My colleagues have said that we need to unite our forces for something, not against something. So stay with us. We are waiting for you to join our next discussion panel. Thank you.